I came to work in birth really because of my own birth experiences that had a really traumatic first birth. Second birth, I got educated and informed, had a beautiful home birth. It changed my life because it showed me how powerful I was as a woman. It showed me how amazing birth could be. It really gave me the contrast of that entry into motherhood where it felt so jarred and jagged and painful and lonely with my first child, as opposed to just this euphoric, oh my God, this is how we're meant to feel experience with my second. So that just got me into, I want to know more, I want to support women, all that kind of stuff. So I really started, I guess, my work with birth, and then became a childbirth educator and a doula, and worked a lot with families, and then found myself naturally moving more towards postnatal trauma counselling. So having also experienced a traumatic experience with birth, I had a lot of empathy and compassion for women that had the same. And as we know, 1 in 3 women, experience trauma from birth. And so I found myself moving more into that counselling role, helping people unpack their stories and their birth and their trauma. And then when I had a third child, so my first, he was 8. Then by the time I had my third, I again went in to have with an idea of a beautiful, powerful, amazing birth experience. And my daughter had a different idea and ended up transferring to hospital, had a long journey, had an undiagnosed breech baby, ended up in an emergency cesarean, which was something I never thought would happen. And she was being resuscitated for quite a long time, and ended up having, quite a bit of trauma, both of us, in those first few days in her birth, connected to her birth. And so when I finally did manage to get her home, I knew enough to know that I'd had a traumatic experience, and so had she, and how are we going to heal from that? And that's when I discovered the work of Aware Parenting by Dr. Aletha Salter. I read her book, The Aware Baby, and it made so much sense to me as to how we process feelings and emotions, how we can help our babies heal from trauma, how we can help ourselves, and also my other kids, just normal childhood traumas and events that happen. So it opened up a whole new world for me around emotions and emotional intelligence and supporting our families. So really I came to this work because out of my own need to have greater, deeper connection with my children, with myself, with helping them heal from the things that were tricky for them. So then that, led me on to understanding more about trauma, doing a lot of aware parenting. I became an aware parenting instructor. And then that from there, as my kids grew, as I was watching their progression, I was like, okay. And then my son moved into those teen years, and I became really like, oh God, how do I help him be a really anchored, aware teenager? How do I help him have a great relationship to sexuality in his body? So then I went and studied sexuality education, and ended up teaching sex ed to teenagers in high schools for a few years. I've really followed my kids' journey of their development of like, I need to know more, and then threw myself into that. And then most recently, I ended up building a school, not for my own children, they were past it, but just seeing the holes in the education system and understanding the impact of what safety feels like for children in order to learn, and trauma-informed education, all that kind of stuff. That all kind of informs my work to bring me to this place now, where we opened a beautiful school last year called Woodline Primary, which is just one of the things I'm most proud of in the world. And through all that, really my work has been just, working one-on-one with parents, running groups for parents, really helping, I guess, to create more harmony in the home. How do we be the best version of ourselves so we can turn up and be the parents our kids really need us to be? So that's kind of where my work has been, I guess, over the last 20 years. It's been a natural evolvement of my learning and growth. Everything I teach, I'm like, I have had to do this myself. I have had to sit in these places and do this work to get to this point. So I'm a big fan of doing the work and not just reading it out of a book or doing a course, but really having to live it so that it is embodied, so that we can support parents in the way they need.
I'm really glad I asked you that question, because it's so in line with the topic of this, the work of growing with your children with Lael Stone. And I think that's been one of the messages as parents that we're just not getting, is the understanding that we too are growing with our children. That we don't have to have the answers, that actually this is part of it. And you've actually taken that to a whole other level.
Okay, so Look, there's my beautiful family. Just to kind of often love to say to people, you know, these are my humans, not the guy on the left. I didn't give birth to him, but that's my lovely husband. We've been together for like 25 years. You know, I often say, look, no matter what the work I have done or training, it is being a parent that has been my biggest education, without doubt. And you know, sitting in the fire with my kids and raising them with as much consciousness as possible, that has definitely been the work for me, as I think as many parents will attest to. And I'm sure you can say the same, Tracy, that it is through parenting and raising your own children that we learn so much. And I love to say too, you know, whenever I do a talk on parenting, that I love to say to my audience, you know, you are the authority on your child. You know them better than anyone. So take whatever I say and run it through a filter of, does this resonate for me? Just because there's a lot of experts out there talking about this, this, and this. I really do believe that as parents, we need to feel into what feels right for us and tune into ourselves and to our children to know how to work with them. So I always talk about the offer of an invitation of what I talk about, so that parents can actually then go, okay, yep, does that feel good? I'll take that bit, you know, because there's not one way to do it. And we really do need to tune into who we are. So aware parenting, I love to talk about from the context of the different styles of parenting that are out there. Aware parenting, as I mentioned before, was developed by Dr. Aletha Salter. So she's a Swiss-American psychologist. And really, she wrote the book, The Aware Baby, I think nearly 30 years ago. I think she was well ahead of her time around the concept of healing and trauma and connection with families. So a lot of what I talk about is based on her work of aware parenting, and then my own stuff that is coming over time. To give a bit of an understanding, I guess, of what aware parenting is, I love to talk about the different styles of parenting, and I really invite parents to reflect on perhaps the way that they were raised. So how your parents may have responded to you can give you a bit of an insight into perhaps how we sometimes default into the parent we are, or how we feel about certain things. So on one end, we have, I guess, what I'd call authoritarian parenting, which uses kind of power over, can sometimes use violence. It uses power to get children to do what we want them to do. So the way that we get kids to behave is we often threat. So that can be like using hitting or spanking, yelling, threatening them, you know, power over. And really the way we control children is because kids are often looking, gosh, my attachment here could be ruptured if I don't do what this person wants me to do, so I must be good in order to survive. But the impact of that for children is often they can feel very angry, they can feel very scared, they can feel very, very powerless, because it's often not okay for them to speak how they feel. There often isn't a lot of love and connection there. It really is more so, I have to be good in order to survive. So what can often happen later in life, particularly in those teen years, which is where I often talk to parents about that the way we raise our kids when they're little has a big impact in these teen years and early adulthood, because it is often connected to how children respond in certain ways. So what can actually happen in the later years is, particularly in the teen years, is because children have been brought up with this authoritarian element of power over, they carry a lot of pain and often stories in their beings and their bodies. And then when they become teenagers, they have to work pretty hard to numb that. And so we see a lot more risky behavior in the teen years. We see a lot of drug taking, alcohol, risky sexual behavior. And we can also see a lot of violence and aggression and bullying come from the teen, as they've been carrying all that kind of hurt themselves. They then often project it outwards. So we see, particularly with all different styles of parenting, but in the teenage years, this is the one where it is often the most rocky, because of the impact of not necessarily being able to speak or be heard when we were younger and being powered over. So that's often what we can see with authoritarian parenting, which uses force to get children to do what we want them to do. We also then have authoritarian, which is non-violent, which isn't necessarily using, force to get children to do what we do, but it's often still about a power imbalance. So it's using things like grounding or punishments, rewards, all those kind of things to get kids to do what we want them to do. So when you're good, I'll reward you with something. When you're bad, I'll take something away from you. And the impact of that for children too is they can often feel very resentful or controlled and also powerless. And what I find happens, particularly in the teenage years, is teenagers become excellent at lying, because there is no point often being transparent or being truthful around what's going on, because I'm going to be punished. You know that, perhaps I can take this to my parents, and even though parents might be like, we love you no matter what, but when you do something that we deem as bad, we're going to still take something away from you. So why would a child be, honest around how they're feeling? So often what can happen in those teenage years is kids can rebel or withdraw emotionally. And the parents, as we get bigger, run out of power, and kids get better at hiding those kind of things. And that is, I think, what we still see a lot of today. We still are in the spectrum of behaviorism parenting, which is still very much that if you are good, I give you love and praise you, and if you're bad, I take something away. And that's how our basically our education is still set up, which is why I worked to set a new school that doesn't use punitive discipline. Our schooling system is still based on that. You're rewarded if you do exactly what I say, and if you don't, then I'm going to take something away from you. So on one hand, we've got a kind of what we'd consider power over parenting, where it really is about the power, it sits with the parents all the time. So that's on one end. On the other end, we'd have what we call permissive parenting, which probably swings too far in the other direction, which is really all about where parents are spending a lot of their energy trying to make sure that their children are happy, or that their children love them, and then they will be okay. So often with permissive parenting, there's no boundaries or there's no limits. It's usually about pleading and kids getting, to get them to do what we want them to do. It is often, for children, it can feel a little bit confusing, or they can feel very insecure, because there's often not those holding or those limits or those boundaries that feel safe. So children will often kind of push to go, where's the edges of where it sits here? And what can happen later is children can become very dependent on the parents. Parents can actually become very resentful of their kids, because it becomes all about the child. Usually we see parents don't have very good boundaries for themselves, or self-care, or all that kind of stuff, because it's all about trying to keep our child happy in these moments. Now, before I kind of discovered aware parenting, I was absolutely a permissive parent, in the sense of that I had a belief system that said if my child was happy, then that meant I was a good mum. So I kept trying very, very hard to make my children happy all the time, which for anyone who does that will know is absolutely exhausting, trying to keep your children happy all the time, because it's impossible, because they're not meant to be happy all the time. But my belief system was, if they're upset, then it's my fault, there's something wrong. So I would just try and, distract them, keep them happy all the time. And again, I ended up being completely burnt out and very resentful as a parent, because it just didn't, it didn't work. So where do we sit in between that? So from that, we then have what we call democratic parenting. So authoritarian on one side, which is usually about a bit of power over from the parents. Permissive parenting is usually where the children have all the power. Democratic parenting is really where we get to where everybody gets their needs met. And the way that this is really where aware parenting sits. And this is about using techniques such as modeling behavior, giving lots of information, working with how do we all get our needs met. It's about listening to feelings and emotions. It's about holding loving limits and boundaries. It's about democratic problem solving. I think this is the way most parents would love to parent, but there's often stuff that gets in the way that makes it tricky for us to be here with this. So how children might feel with this is they often feel loved and secure and confident. And what happens later in life is that children do become self-disciplined. They don't often have a strong need to rebel or withdraw, because there is that beautiful mutual respect and understanding. And I guess the imprint for the child is, it is safe for me to come to my parent with my big feelings and emotions, and it will be deeply held and respected. And therefore, we create this beautiful mutual respect between the parent and the child as they grow. So again, I think I come back to, that I think that's how most people would love to parent. But the way that we were parented often unconsciously has such an impact on us. If we grew up in an environment where it wasn't safe to get upset, where we were never allowed to say that I'm angry, we learn that, feelings are not okay, so we have to shut them down. And so then when we become parents and our children have big feelings or emotions, we will often default into, this is not okay, I need to shut it down, I need to stop this. It often can tap us into our own wounds and feelings, which, we'll get into in a little bit as well. So I think on some level, we all ideally would love to be that beautiful democratic parent, but it's usually what happened in our own childhoods that impacts the way we parent. And unless we kind of look back to see how and where this has come from, we often will not necessarily parent in the way that we want to moving forward. Does that all make sense as a place to start?
Absolutely. I often say to my families, we parent in the way we were parented subconsciously.
Yes.
In other words, the imprint or the plan, the program's been installed. Now that can be great news for some and not great news for others.
Yeah.
And so becoming conscious and being able to change the programs, and we can do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, I guess when I'm talking about what does aware parenting or less democratic parenting look like, a big part of it for me is, that beautiful attunement to children. So meeting their needs, for closeness, for connection, for play, for all that kind of stuff. But it's also about helping our children process their feelings and emotions so that, again, they know deep in their soul, it's safe for me to be all of who I am. When we've grown up in an environment where the message we received is we love you when you're good, but when you're bad, we withdraw love from you. What it often sets up in the child is I'm only lovable when I'm good. And so therefore we move into adulthood going, well, do you approve of me? And have I done a good enough job? And am I pretty enough? Or am I earning enough money? And is my enoughness enough that I'm worthy of being loved? Whereas when we parent in a way where we welcome and accept all our children's big feelings and emotions, the message that we're sending them is, I love all parts of you. Because whether we like it or not, we are all parts of feelings and emotions. We are angry and jealous and sad and lonely, and we are also joyous and passionate and happy and all that kind of stuff. Like, these feelings just sit on this big spectrum. But for a long time, the message we've got is only these feelings are okay. Whereas these ones over here, where the anger and the sadness and the uncomfortable ones are not okay, and we need to do whatever we can to not feel them and then move over here. Yet these are just parts of us. And when we learn to feel them in safe ways, we feel them, let them go, we move on, and we become whole and integrated in knowing that's who we are. Yet our culture and our society for a long time has said, this is not okay. And so what do we need to do to stop it? And how do we get back over to here? And the impact of that is that we have all these other feelings that are sitting here that are just constantly tapping on the window going, hello, I'm here. I need to be acknowledged and felt. And then what often happens is that can turn up in mental health issues. It can turn up as anxiety, depression. It can turn up into lots of other ways because we are negating and not feeling, these parts of us. And so I guess where I sit within parenting is that we want to teach our children how to feel all their feelings safely, know how to ask for support, know how to process them in a healthy way so that we can be integrated and whole as a human. So one of the things I love to speak into is, why would kids have big feelings and emotions? And I really believe this, it starts, with little bubbers all the way up to adults, and even applies to us, about why we do have big feelings and emotions. And I put it in a really simple way for kids, for parents around children, is that children are what I call either in balance or out of balance. So when your child's in balance, because you can hear them in their bedroom singing, they're chatting away to the dog, they come out and they want to play with their sibling, and you might say to them, sweetheart, can you please pick your shoes up? And they go, yeah, no problem, Mum. And then they do it, right? And that's when we're looking at our child and we're thinking, wow, I'm really mastering this parenting here, because look how happy my child is in that moment. When our kids are out of balance is, when they walk in the room and they kick the dog, or they go up to their sibling and pick a fight straight away. Or you say to them, sweetheart, can you please set the table for dinner? And they're like, why do I have to do everything? Or they don't listen to what you're saying. When kids are out of balance, it's when we're seeing all those other big feelings and emotions where they're not kind of in their center. And so a really great, I think, first step for parents is to understand is that a child's external behavior, so what we're seeing on the outside, is always a reflection of their internal state. So a child's natural state is to want to be in balance. They want to feel good. They want to feel connected to us. But when there's some stuff in the way, which can be worries or concerns, it can be basic things like not getting their needs met, like they're hungry or they need to go to sleep. Or it can be feelings or fears or worries from the past that can be sitting there that can have an impact on how in balance they feel. And I love to give a bit of an example of, I'm going to use my little guy here if everyone can see it, of why our kids might be out of balance. And if I was to talk about, let me talk about a beautiful 4-year-old for a minute. And you know, we could call this 4-year-old Jack, right? Now, 4-year-old Jack is the same as 14-year-old Maddie. It's also kind of the same as 28-year-old James, right? It's kind of all of us on some level, but let's give 4-year-old Jack a bit of an idea as to why he might be feeling out of balance in his being. You know, a lot of parents say to me, what have my kids got to feel unhappy about? We live in a beautiful house. They get far better food than what I was ever given. They do piano and karate. They get to see their mates all the time. What on earth would they have to be worried about? But I want to give an example of how many kind of, I guess, stresses and tensions and powerlessness our kids can feel just in a simple day. So let's imagine 4-year-old Jack, he's got a day at kinder, right? And 4-year-old Jack's sound asleep in bed, and mum opens the door because she's realized that they've all slept in and they've got exactly 28 minutes to get ready to get to kinder. So even though mum's trying to be calm, all of a sudden she's like, Jack, it's time to get up. Come on, darling, we need to get ready for kinder. And all of a sudden she's taking his pajama top off and trying to put clothes on and do all this stuff. And Jack's just like, whoa, I've just kind of woken up. So he's starting the day with a little bit of tension in his body. So we start with a little bit of tension to start the day. So we get Jack dressed, but then we come downstairs and mum's like, what do you want for breakfast, darling? Do you want cereal, or do you want toast, or do you want a muffin, or what do you want to have? And all of a sudden there's all these questions being projected at Jack, and Jack just sees his trains on the floors and he's like, oh my God, there's my trains. And he just want to play with his trains. And all of a sudden he's got someone asking him all these questions that he doesn't really care about because he just want to play with his trains. So we've got a little bit more tension going on in his body. And then, you know, we managed to have breakfast. Then we have to try and find shoes. I don't know why always putting shoes on was so stressful when kids are little, but just we spend all this time trying to put shoes on, a little bit more tension. Then we get in the car. That's also very stressful. We get in the car. And then we get to kinder. And even though Jack quite likes being at kinder, he still has to separate from mum and he still has to say goodbye for the day. And that can feel really big. And so there's some feelings that come up for him as he says goodbye. So a little bit more tension goes on in his body because he has to separate. And then he looks around and his favorite teacher isn't there for the day, but there's someone else. Now, this other teacher, you know, is still quite nice, but Jack's like, I don't really know who you are. So there's, again, a little bit more tension that goes on. And then he finds there's all the blocks on the floor that he loves building with. So he goes over to the floor and he starts building, you know, his tower, and he's really happy in his world building. And then another kid, Charlie, walks along and kind of kicks over his building, and all of a sudden all he's just built has been on the floor, and he feels really quite upset about that. So more tension. And then someone comes in and says, don't worry about it, Jack, just build another one. You don't need to get upset. You don't need to worry about it. But he does feel upset, and all of a sudden he's looking around going, it's not okay for me to be upset about what I'm upset about. Bit more tension in his body. So a few other things happen throughout the day of kinder because there's little people and, you know, there's lots of stuff that goes on. So we get a bit more tension. And then mum comes to pick him up, and he's very happy to see mum. And then we get home and mum moves into, you know, the beautiful afternoon dinner hustle of trying to get everything going. And so then Jack walks into the kitchen and says, Mum, can I please have, can I have a cookie before dinner? And she's like, oh, okay, you can just have one. So she goes to get the biscuit, and then Jack's mum realizes, God, I haven't eaten since 8:30 this morning, and takes a bite out of the biscuit and then hands it to Jack. Now, for anyone who's a parent, you know, when you cut the sandwich the wrong way, you give them the wrong coloured cup, or you take a bite out of their cookie and then give it to them. Jack takes one look at that cookie, and then what does he do? He does this. He has this big, beautiful, fabulous tantrum on the kitchen floor because you gave him a cookie that had a bite taken out of it. Now, we could look at that and go, oh, it's just a cookie. Don't worry about it, mate. I could get you another one, except then you realize that was the last cookie in the jar and there's none there, right? But really, as we understand what's happened in Jack's day, that is not about the cookie. That is about all the buildup of feelings and tensions and stuff that has happened throughout the day. And then Jack comes home to his one safe place, and all of a sudden those feelings come pouring out of him. Now, as a culture, we've been taught to believe that that is perhaps wrong. You know, how dare you be upset about a biscuit? And the way that we might respond to that can, you know, in conjunction with the way we were parented, has an impact on that message Jack gets around feelings and emotions. Now, a lot of parents often say to me, well, look, why can't he just say, you know, well, actually, no, what I think parents often still expect from a 4-year-old is for him to walk in, see you've taken a bite out of the cookie, take a deep breath and say, Mum, I'm very disappointed that you just took a bite out of that biscuit. Do you know what kind of day I've had? It's been very, very stressful. First of all, you rushed me this morning, and then it's hard to say goodbye at kinder, and then someone knocked over my tower, and then this happened and that happened, and now I have a lot of feelings because you took a bite out of my biscuit. I think we as adults still think that children should be able to articulate that. I think we still have this belief system that they should have the emotional intelligence to be able to just come in and say, here's all my big feelings and emotions. Yet us as adults don't even do that, and I love to give the example of what Jack's mum's had been like, her day's been like. When we think about where Jack's mum is, she woke up stressed because we've got 28 minutes to get ready. So all of a sudden she's got the tension on, trying to get the kids out the door, manages to drop her kids off to kinder and school, races to work. Someone cuts her off in traffic, tension for her. She gets into the office. There's an email from the boss saying we need a meeting now. And, there's no emojis or happy language. So she's like, oh God, this isn't going to be good. More tension for her. Goes and has the meeting. Doesn't go well. Comes back, realizes someone's taken, half of her lunch. More tension there. Then looks at the time and thinks, my God, I've got to go back and pick up the kids. So on the way is racing to pick up Jack from kinder and the older brother from school, and rings her partner and says, darling, we don't have any milk. Could you please pick up some on the way home? And her partner's like, yeah, no worries, I'll get the milk. And then she picks up the kids and she gets home, and then Jack has a big meltdown about the cookie. And so she's got all her tension building, and then her beautiful partner walks in the door. And he goes, hey, everybody. And she's like, did you get the milk? And he's like, oh, sorry, I forgot. Now, does Jack's mum go, that's fine, darling. I've had a very, very stressful day. My tension has been high. And I've just asked you to remember just one thing and you've forgotten. It's okay, right? She doesn't do that, does she? Because we're human. Jack's mum's like, I asked you to get one thing. All you have to think about is one thing, right? And she just starts projecting all this build-up of feelings onto this partner, right? Who's meanwhile like just backing out of the room going, I'm just going to go to the shop and get the milk. Now, we are an adult with a fully functioning prefrontal cortex. We are an adult that has hopefully had a lifetime of learning about our feelings and emotions, and yet we are reactive, and yet we respond in these ways. And we often expect our children to have a far greater emotional intelligence than what we even display. Yeah. So I think what is so vital and important to remember here is that when we see big feelings in our children or our teenagers, it is not because they are bad, it is not because they are wrong, it is because they are learning, and it is our job to teach them how to navigate these feelings and emotions in a healthy way. So, to bring it back to why kids may have some feelings, I talk about there is a need for assistance. So sometimes, when a child is upset or angry, it's because they need some help. It's because they need food. It's because there's a need that we can meet. And when we meet that need, they feel fine. Sometimes when kids are upset, it's because there's a great need for information as well, which is that loud noise there was a truck going by, to a little person if they're worried. You give them information, helps them understand. For some children, they need to know, we're leaving in 10 minutes and we're going to go to this place and this person will be here and this will happen and that will happen. And that gives them the information that makes them feel, okay, I can understand what's going on. But the third thing that I see a lot of is there's just these unmet feelings or buildups of stresses or tensions that may have happened throughout their day, or even traumas that have happened in the past that get tapped into, and that's when big feelings pop up. So when we usually meet those first two levels there of food or comfort or sleep or some help tying your shoelaces or information, usually when we meet those needs, children are fine. But it's the third one, the bigger feelings and emotions that are there, that I find parents often struggle with and want to know why are you upset? What's wrong? How do I fix it straight away? But I think one of the most important things we can understand as parents is our job is not to fix our children, but to stand beside them and help them navigate the feelings that go with it. Because when we launch into just kind of fixing or trying to band-aid whatever's going on, we are robbing our children of the ability to develop resilience and the ability to navigate hard things or big feelings and emotions and find their way back into balance. So this is why I often say that meltdowns are very, very good for the brain, particularly for our younger children. So up until about the age of 7 or 8, their prefrontal cortex, which is that rational thinking part of their brains, is still developing. So when they have a buildup of tension, so when their nervous system hits capacity, just like Jack, when we get to the point where, you know, we've had a big day of all this pressure and then something little goes wrong, then what happens is that prefrontal cortex often goes offline. So if you know the work of Dan Siegel, he talks about it flipping its lid. And then what happens is the amygdala and the nervous system has to reset itself. And the way it resets itself is by crying, by raging, by laughing. And so many of you will have experienced that when you cut your child's sandwich the wrong way, or give them the wrong colored cup, or their sister has more ice cream than them, when they have a big, massive meltdown around that whole thing, after they've had, you know, this isn't fair and I don't like you and all those kind of big feelings, it often then moves into tears, and then it'll move into wanting some comfort and those big sobs. And then you'll watch their whole little bodies just kind of soften and drop. And then they'll be like, what's for dinner? And it's like nothing has ever happened, right? The storm has passed, because the brain and the body has done exactly what it needs to, which is it has discharged all that stress and tension and trauma. It's found its way back into balance and it can feel calm again. So many parents will have experienced, you know, a massive storm coming, and then you come out the other side, and it's usually the parents that are sitting there going, oh my God, what just happened? And as the child's come back into balance. Now, as adults, you know, or really after the age of 7 or 8, we start to develop the language and the tools to go, I am angry, this is what I need to do with my anger, or I am really sad, I need to have a cry or a talk to my friend. But for our little people, they are still learning how to do this. And so even in our teenage years, you know, when teenagers get angry or get upset, you know, it's not a bad thing. They're trying to discharge these feelings and emotions. It's why I often say teenagers will come in and try and pick fights with adults, even on things that you agree on. They'll often come in and just kind of poke and provoke, because what they're trying to do is find something to push up against, so that they've got a reason to discharge some of the tensions and feelings that they've got going on there. And I guess the goal within all this is to make it safe enough for our kids to feel all these feelings, to develop language around it, so that they then can develop into adults who, when they do feel upset, are able to tune into that and go, gosh, I feel really sad, I'm going to call a friend. Or I'm so angry, I can feel this all in my body, I need to go for a run, I've got to do some yoga, you know, I need to put on loud music and dance and thrash about, because I can feel a whole lot of stuff here that I need to move in a safe way, instead of, you know, the other ways that we usually do with it. So part of, again, what we're doing here is helping to model to our children right from the beginning that feelings and emotions are okay. So here's a little quote that I have, which really is about the benefits of crying and the benefits of releasing these emotions, which are so much about helping our nervous system come back online, but also the healing aspects. You know, I talk about releasing tears and emotions is our natural inbuilt healing mechanism that allows us to come back into balance when we have been really, really off track. And many of you as adults will feel this too. You know, when you feel stuff brewing and then you have a big cry, how do we feel afterwards? We feel calmer. We feel like I can cope. There is more space to figure out what we need to do from here. So the healing benefits of crying and releasing our feelings are so paramount. But I think it's important to remember that we have been brought up in a culture that has often made this wrong. And that's why it often feels very, very uncomfortable for us as humans.
Well, I think you've just described there so beautifully. One of the biggest things that move the needle in parenting is the understanding and acceptance of children's emotional meltdowns, seeing the benefit of it and the power of it in terms of how it brings the body back into some level of balance again. But also probably the biggest challenge, because our ability to accept our children's emotions is often very reflected in how we accept our own emotions. And therein lies the work of parenting. So that is a real needle mover right there. Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah. And we'll definitely get into that in a minute, because that is the biggest part that trips parents up for sure.
Yeah.
You know, because so many parents I work with, they're like, it just, when my child gets upset, I get panicked and I need it to stop straight away. Or I just get angry. When they get angry, I just get angrier. Why do I get angry? And I'm like, okay, we can unpack why. It is such a if we were not brought up in a environment where it was safe to express feelings and emotions, it is always going to feel foreign. And so I often talk about it that learning to parent in this way with compassion and connection and listening and healing and all that kind of stuff is like learning a brand new language. Now, let's just say that it's like learning Italian. If you grew up in an environment where you spoke fluent Italian, your parents listened to your feelings, they were compassionate, they did their own work, you would have grown up speaking fluent Italian, so that when you became a parent, it's your native tongue. It's easy to lean into feelings and emotions. It's easy to be compassionate. It's easy to hold space for the big stuff that goes on. But most of us didn't grow up speaking Italian. Most of us grew up speaking English. And then when we kind of come to a point and go, God, I need to learn how to speak Italian, it's clunky and it feels hard and we get it wrong. And we have to be around others that speak Italian so we get better at it. And it's the practice and practice and practice of learning to be with feelings and emotions that allows us then to become fluent in Italian. It doesn't just happen overnight, because our native tongue for so long has been English. And what that native tongue has been is don't feel these things. It's not okay. So it takes time and lots of compassion for ourselves and practice and being around others who speak similar language to learn actually how to do it. I did not grow up in a fluent speaking Italian family, right? My parents were very kind and compassionate and gorgeous, but feelings and emotions weren't necessarily one that were welcomed as much. So then when I became a parent, I had to learn how to speak Italian. I had to learn how to be with big feelings and emotions. It took practice, and it also took me learning, being with my own feelings and emotions to then be comfortable doing it with my children.
Yeah, now I speak. Share about that.
Yeah, well, it took a lot of practice, right? Because for the first 8 years of being a parent, and really I didn't know about aware parenting and all that kind of stuff, I really was that permissive parent, and I really thought my job was to keep my kids happy all the time. So I would plead with them. I would never really say no. It was really stressful, and I didn't enjoy being a parent at all. And it was only when I began to learn that it was safe to have boundaries, that I could listen to feelings and emotions, that parenting became so much easier, because I knew that it wasn't my job to keep my children happy. I knew that it was okay for them to experience hard things as long as I was there beside them, going, I see you and I hear you and I'm right with you, and I trust your ability to find your way back into the balance, which they did. And it became taking this whole pressure off myself of I have to be like this so they're like that. Instead, it became about trusting their journey and knowing that anger and sad is just as beautiful as happy and joy, right? We're just going to keep moving through these things. So I had to learn how to do it. And in the beginning, it was uncomfortable and it was tricky, and yet it was the most powerful thing I've ever done in raising my children, without doubt, and for who I am. So I would love to just give a bit of an example around what we might do with Jack from the perspective of the different styles of parenting. If we were kind of coming from an authoritarian parenting point of view, and Jack comes in and Jack is upset because you took a bite out of the cookie, how an authoritarian parent might respond is by sending him to his room, by yelling at him, why are you bothering getting upset? If you don't stop crying, there'll be no dinner. It would be really about a punishment or about getting him to stop at all costs. Now, what would Jack be feeling like if that was happening? What actually happens for Jack in those moments is when love is withdrawn, or we're told we're wrong or we're bad or we're sent to our room, then what often happens is Jack moves into a shame response, which is usually a story that says, I am bad, I am wrong, because, I've been disconnected from. And really, it doesn't even address the buildup of tensions that have happened throughout the day. What actually becomes even more prominent is, for Jack, my attachment figure, the person that's meant to love me and care for me, well, there's now a rupture. So I need to now work really hard to make sure it's okay. So Jack then learns to become a good boy, and he learns to suppress those feelings and emotions, because it becomes all about, I need to stay attached to you, because that's what, we know as survival when we're little. So from an authoritarian point of view, it won't have helped necessarily Jack move the tensions of the day. It actually will have just added more to the top of it. If we were to look from a permissive point of view, what might happen, when we took a bite out of the cookie and Jack gets really upset on the floor, what we might do as a permissive parent is we might go, oh my God, how about I bake you a fresh batch of cookies? And we set about trying to fix it and band-aid it and bake for fresh cookies. And that's what I would have done to try and make it all okay, right? But really, again, it won't have addressed what's happened for Jack. It will just probably put a band-aid on until the next thing comes, and then we've got a band-aid on top of that, So from an aware parenting point of view or a connected parenting point of view, when Jack has a big meltdown because we took a bite out of the cookie, then what we do is we take a deep breath. We might get down on the floor with him and we just listen. And we say, oh, buddy, I am so sorry I took a bite out of that cookie. Tell me all about it. And we listen to him get angry and upset. And we sit there with empathy and compassion and say, gosh, that sounds hard. What else? And we trust in his beautiful nervous system to bring all those big feelings to the surface and that they will eventually slowly move. And as we sit there and we listen with empathy and compassion, one of the most powerful things that we are doing in that moment is modeling to our children what empathy and compassion looks like. And not only that, we are sending them the message that says, it's okay for you to feel the way you're feeling, and I'm here and I still love you and I'm here to help you ride out this storm. So I often say to parents, our job is to be what I call the anchor, which is we are this rock solid point, and our kiddies are these beautiful little boats out on an ocean. And sometimes it's really smooth sailing and sometimes it's calm waters and it's beautiful, but sometimes it's super rocky. And the times when it's really rocky, what our children need more than anything is this beautiful anchor point that says, hey, I've got you. I'm here. These feelings are not too big for me. I can hold this. And in those moments when we're doing that, we are imprinting to our children, all of you is welcome here, not just the good parts. So what happens is we begin to listen and we offer that empathy and compassion. Our children begin to integrate that. We have these beautiful things called mirror neurons, which means that when we are calm and we're sitting there and somebody's there angry and upset, our calmness begins to register with them and they feel safe enough to move those feelings and find their own inner sense of calm. Whereas if we get into the drama with them and we start getting all worried and agitated as well, we're going to feed more of that fuel. Whereas if we can bring that calmness and that connection in those moments, then what will happen? The storm will be there and it will move into those beautiful tears and then it will pass. And then what we often observe after is a child that feels relaxed. They'll often sleep better. They'll be more articulate with what they're feeling. And only after the storm has passed, then you might say something to little 4-year-old Jack like, oh, did you have a big day at kinder today, sweetheart? What happened? And that's where he might go, well, I find it hard to say goodbye to you. Or he might say, Charlie knocked over my tower, or, and we can just say, yes, that sounds really hard. That must have been challenging. And then as we keep listening to these feelings, the beautiful thing is with the children start to develop an emotional intelligence because they begin to hear the words we're using. I can see how angry you are. I can see you're really upset, sweetheart, let it out. And then as their brain develops and grows, they begin to then develop the language to be able to come in and say, I'm so angry. Do you know what happened at school today? And you go be like, tell me, come on, how do we get this anger out? What are we going to do? Do you want to wrestle? Do you want to rumble? Should we rip up bits of paper? Tell me, I'm here. I welcome your anger. Let's move it. Right? So we begin then to model and teach our children how to be with these feelings and emotions in a healthy way. One of the big things I often say to parents is that we don't often model to our children healthy ways to express our feelings. And the beautiful thing about our kids is they are such they're so highly attuned to us. And many of you will have experienced this, is that you can be feeling really angry or upset about something and your child will come in and they'll go, are you okay, Daddy? And you might be like, yeah, I'm fine. Right? And yet your child's looking at you going, no, you're not. I can feel that you're not. We do such an injustice to our children if we don't honestly tell them how we feel, because what happens is their inner barometer, their intuition is saying something's off with this adult. And then when they go and ask, and then the adult says, no, I'm fine, and it teaches them to distrust that inner knowing within them. We are far better off saying, I'm actually really angry at the moment, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go move my body in a certain way, or I'm going to go outside and take my shoes off and yell at the trees because it helps me feel better. Or if your child comes to you and says, are you okay, mama? And you're feeling sad, you are so much better off saying, actually, I feel really sad, but I'm going to go ring my friend and have a talk because I feel better when I have a talk and a cry. Because what you are then doing is you are modeling healthy ways to be with your feelings and move them. Children cannot be what they can't see. So if we're wanting our children to have this beautiful emotional awareness and intelligence, then we have to model ways of how we work with that. We have to show them healthy ways of moving our anger. We have to show them healthy ways of processing our sad and our feelings. Now, this doesn't mean like being in the fetal position on the lounge room floor sobbing by yourself, right? That's usually probably too overwhelming and big for our kids, right? You know, if you are feeling that overwhelmed, you need another adult or someone else there to support and help you. But our children need to see us cry and then come back into balance. Our children need to see us move our frustrations and our feelings so that we model healthy ways for them to do it, because then they do become teens who tune into themselves and say, God, I'm feeling really stressed. I need to go and journal, or I want to go and talk to someone, or, you know, my body feels agitated. I need to move it. Or, you know, they learn ways to navigate how to process how they're feeling. But it starts with us and what we model within those, you know, within that. So one of the big things that often pops up for parents is when I talk about feelings and emotions, you know, they often say, well, does that mean my kid just gets to lose it all the time, or we don't have any boundaries? But I think it is so vital and important to understand that children need all this beautiful love and connection and listening and playfulness. They also need these beautiful boundaries and holding. So my lovely colleague, Marion Rose, who I do my podcast with, you know, she has a term called loving limits, which I love because I think it explains it so beautifully, how to set a limit. And she has this great saying, we can say no to the behavior and yes to the feelings. And I find this is so powerful as a concept, because many of us think as parents that when we say no to something, so let's just imagine that, you know, Jack's got the ball and he's throwing it against the wall in the house, and we go up to him and we say, Jack, please stop throwing the ball at the wall. We throw balls outside. And he just looks at you. You know, we expect that probably what Jack would do is go, oh, yep, sure, no worries, mum, good limit. I'll stop right now. I think we still think that kids will just go, yep, no problem. But he doesn't. He kind of keeps throwing the ball and he looks at you and he might even give you a cheeky smile. And then you stop, you're like, Jack, stop throwing the ball at the wall, right? And he keeps doing it. Now, often what can happen is he's looking for a limit. He's looking for a parent to go over and actually hold his wrist and grab the ball and say, mate, I'm not willing for you to do the ball, throw the ball in the house. Now, if Jack's got a build-up of feelings and emotions, you know, that have been sitting in that emotional backpack, then when we set a limit, that's going to be something for him to push up against, and those feelings are going to come pouring out. And that is a really good, healthy thing. And sometimes that's what kids look for. They look for those boundaries to push up against so they can move their feelings. Whereas if Jack doesn't have a backpack full of feelings, if he's feeling pretty balanced, and we say, mate, it's time to stop throwing the ball on the wall, and we go and take it off him, he might be like, oh, but then he'll move on pretty quickly. Whereas sometimes when kids have got all these big feelings and emotions, when we set a no around something, then all those feelings come pouring out. And you can tell whether it's feelings from the past, because usually the reaction is so over the top to what you're asking. It seems, you know, really big. And that's often when we say, okay, no more iPad, and we're turning the iPad off, and then kids get all these big feelings, is often because there's an accumulation of stuff sitting there, and then we set a limit around something, then it's a safe place for them to bring those feelings and emotions. Now, one of the reasons why parents often, I find, are really wary about setting boundaries and limits is because they feel really uncomfortable with the feelings that are going to come, again, because we're not taught how to be with these big feelings and emotions, which is why we avoid setting limits, which is why I used to avoid setting limits when my kids were little, because I was like, I didn't know what to do with all the big feelings and emotions. Like, that was too much for me. So I just kept trying to keep them happy. And then when I began to learn, actually, it's okay for me to say no and to be present with the feelings that come from that, then what happened is, if there were feelings there, then they were going to tell me all about it, and they'd come back into balance, and then we'd actually move on quite happily. So we can say no to a behavior, but we can say yes to the feelings that come from it. It is okay for our kids to be annoyed when we say no about something. It is okay for them to complain how unfair they think it is. You know, we want them to have that voice to get it out. It doesn't mean we change our no, but we welcome the feelings that come from it. And I think, again, as a culture, we're so uncomfortable often with those big feelings and emotions, we try and avoid them. So we either do this, we either power over and say, this is how it is, and I'm the boss, and you do what I say, and then there's no room for a child to respond, or we don't set any limits at all, and then the child just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing until there's an edge and a boundary, you know, that they can have something to move their feelings with. Whereas we can actually meet in the middle, and we can say no, and we can listen to the feelings that come from it. Can be one of the most powerful things we do as parents. Doing a lot of talking here. Are we still good, Tracy? Are we still on track? Or are you happy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're hitting such key things that move the needle, and that's the thing I always talk about is, you know, what's going to make the biggest difference, and this is just fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. So love the lovely Robin Grill, who's an Australian author who wrote Parenting for a Peaceful World. I love his quote around feelings, which is time and time again, children are heavily reprimanded for committing the offense of crying or being angry. And let's get this straight. Emotions are not bad behavior. Emotions don't hurt anyone. Suppressing children's emotions does, on the other hand, cause them harm over time. And if done repeatedly, it unbalances their brain chemistry, it stresses their immune and digestive system, and it undermines their ability to relate to others. So more than ever in our world, we need to be raising emotionally intelligent children. We can see where the world is at, and the impact, again, of not having healthy ways to express our feelings and emotions is we have to then learn to do something with it, which is what I kind of want to touch on now. One of the big things I say to parents too, when they're where is anger, is that anger is often a mask for sad and all those other feelings that sit behind it. And so what we often need to allow anger to melt, so for children to move past that anger, is safety and connection so they can move into the feelings that are sitting underneath. So what we learn to do if we don't express our feelings is I talk about, we do often three things with feelings. If we learn or grow up in an environment where it's not safe to express our feelings, one of the first things, and probably the most prominent that a lot of adults do, is we learn to repress them, which is when we get the message, it's not okay for me to be angry, or it's not okay for me to be upset, then I need to do something with those feelings. Well, then I'm going to repress them. So that can look like thumb sucking for little people. It can look like wanting to be on the iPad all the time. It can look like wanting to eat. Every time I get upset, I want to eat. It can be, for little people, can be needing to be constantly busy. It can be dependent on like a dummy or a blanket or all those kind of things. When I get upset, I want this thing, and then I kind of numb. For children, it can be technology, it can be food, it can be anything that kind of brings that kind of numbing. And I think the big piece, which is really vital to look at, is particularly for teenagers, repression mechanisms become such a big thing in those teenage years. And that can look like drugs, alcohol, sex, pornography, online gaming, all those kind of things. Now, for adults, we also have repression mechanisms. I mean, we all do it, but for adults, it can be, again, scrolling on Instagram for 3 hours. It can be online shopping. It can be drinking a bottle of wine at night. It can be taking drugs. It can be all those things. Now, repression mechanisms on their own are not a bad thing. Sometimes we need to do them just to kind of keep ourselves. Sometimes we all need to numb a little bit, but it's if we are defaulting to those repression mechanisms and not expressing our feelings and emotions, then that's what becomes an issue. So we see that with children, if they don't have healthy ways to get their feelings out, they have to develop repression mechanisms to cope, which means they can become obsessed with the iPad, or wanting to eat all the time, or wanting to check out in certain ways. And then what happens is we often see agitation in their bodies. We see that they don't sleep well. It's hard for them to concentrate. Their body isn't in a natural state of balance because there's a whole lot of stuff sitting there. So our default as a culture, particularly over the last generations, is when we feel something, it's not safe to feel it, so repress it. And what do we do to numb ourselves out? The second thing that we learn to do, if it's not safe to express feelings and emotions, is turn it into aggression. And this is where we see a massive issue, particularly with men in our culture. And I have a lot of compassion for men, because the message most of them got when they were young was, don't be weak, don't be vulnerable, don't cry. And so what are they going to do with it? They repress it. But then often what happens is, when they are then in situations where they feel like they're being made fun of, where they feel really powerless, where they feel like they're not being heard, those feelings that are sitting there come pouring out in aggression and projected onto other people. And that's where we see a lot of violence against women. It's where we see probably where the world is at the moment, is due to a lot of repressed and aggressive feelings that are stored that then come pouring. This is where war and violence comes from, right? Because it was never safe for them to feel what they need to. And that's where we often see in little people, it's where 3-year-olds are hitting or biting or scratching, all that kind of stuff. It's not because they're bad, and it doesn't matter how many times you say gentle hands. It's because there's a buildup of feelings in their little bodies that they haven't been able to express. So whenever we see a child acting out aggressively, that to me is a child that's got some powerlessness on board. And what we need to do is work with some play and some power reversal games and holding space for some feelings, so that they can kind of move the backlog of feelings there, so they can come back into that gentleness. And then I guess the third thing that we do is expression, which is the healthy expression of feelings, which is crying, raging, tantruming, laughing, talking about what's going on. That's the healthy way of moving those feelings. So we don't need to do those other two. And people listening to this might be like, yep, I'm like, I binge watch Netflix and drink wine or eat all the ice cream or all the chocolate when I don't want to deal or cope. That's what I go to. And I'm not saying that's bad. We all do it at some point, but it has an impact if we are disconnecting from life, or we are also not feeling what we're needing to feel, right? And this is often where addictions come from as well, right? Addictions are people who are just dealing with trauma. And when it's not safe to feel, or we haven't learnt ways to feel or deal with it, we are going to find a way to cope. And so then often numbing out, getting really stoned or drinking lots or doing whatever we're doing is our survival mechanism. It does not make that person wrong or bad. It is just the only way they're learning to cope with the big trauma and the feelings that they've got sitting there. So, I come back to this saying, and this is one of our big things that we talk about at my school. There's no such thing as a bad kid or a bad parent. There is often just something in the way. So when we see a child acting out, that for me is a child that's got something going on, and we need to look behind the behavior to go, what's happening here? Because their natural state is to be a beautiful, connected little human, but there's something happening here and we need to work with it to help. And that's the same as us as adults. If you are a really angry person and you keep projecting that onto everyone, then I would say that there's probably a lot of pain and hurt in there that hasn't been safe enough to feel. Or if you're a person that needs to control everything, it's probably because there's been lots of powerlessness in your life. There is no such thing as a bad human at all. We're all doing the best job we know how. And it's often there's just stuff that's got in the way that stopped us from doing that. So, that brings me, I guess, to our point around, us as parents and our triggers. One of my biggest things I often say to adults is that on a good day, when we're feeling, we've had enough sleep and we're feeling resourced and there's enough money in the bank and someone's made dinner for us and our kids come in and they're having a hard time, we can be compassionate and we can be calm, and usually we can meet our kids in that way. But it's the other times when we don't have that, when we're feeling stressed or we're feeling stretched, that kind of stuff, when we do get reactive. And much like children, usually our reactions due to three things. One is we're just not getting our needs met, which means you need a break, or you need to eat something, or you probably need some more sleep. It's, firstly, there's a need. And when we can start to meet that need in the adult, then we can feel more compassionate to our children. The second thing that we often get, we lose it about, or why we get really triggered, is usually because of what we're telling ourselves. So, if we have a bit of a story or a loop going on that I'm a bad parent, or my child is just really annoying, or why they make my life hard, or that kind of stuff, we're often in a bit of a negative lens loop, which is really about expectations and what we're seeing. And so that's where we can often respond reactively. Well, the third reason we often get really triggered as a parent is because of our own past wounds and hurts. So it can be about our own powerlessness as when we were kids. It can be about all our own hurt feelings which we never got to express. Any parent will tell you that their kids are just the most beautiful people who know how to push the exact right buttons within them, right? And it's usually because the child comes in and goes, hey, see that baggage you've got there? I don't want to hold it. So I'm going to push these buttons for you, and hopefully you will do the work so you no longer project that onto me, because I don't want to carry around your stuff. That's for you to carry. So often children's reactions, or the way they bring our stuff to us, is because they're like, hey, I need you to do the work here, parent. I need you to look at where your stuff's coming from. So in regards to that, I talk about something called imprints. And for me, what imprints are the stories and beliefs that we take on board as children and then continue to look for evidence to be true as we grow up. So an example of this might be, let's just say that you grew up in a family and the message you receive from your parents is that you can't trust anyone. You shouldn't trust life. You shouldn't trust everyone. People are always out to get you. People are always going to rip you off. They never trust anyone. So the message you grew up in your family was this. This is one of the, you don't ever trust anyone and you don't ever trust life. And that's the imprint you received, right? That was the story you were told. So you go, okay, I believe that to be true. And then we grow up and we move through life and we're really wary of people. And then we become parents and all of a sudden we're like, I don't trust anyone with my children and the world is not safe, and be careful, don't climb on that that tree, you might fall over and break your arm. And what we're doing is we're continuing the imprint we received, which is, you know, we can't trust anyone, and we can't trust our children. I can't trust myself, or all that kind of stuff. Now you can substitute that story on trust around with money, right? We all have imprints around money. You know, did you grow up in a family that says you must work super hard to earn money, and then you deserve a 2-week holiday, but only if you've worked hard, then you deserve to rest, right? Or was your imprint around self-care that women, particularly as mothers, they don't get self-care? That's selfish. Your job is to be a martyr and give to everybody else, right? And if you stop and take self-care, then you should feel guilty about it. Or is your imprint around relationships is that, you know, what relationships look like is yelling at each other. If you yell at each other, it means that you love each other. Or is your imprint around, I don't know, boundaries is that, you know, it's not safe to have them. I don't know. We have imprints on everything. You know, we have this whole book of what we've learned as children around how we see the world. And the work that I often do is that we then get to a point where we become parents, and I ask parents to go, let's explore what our imprints and belief systems are around these things. What happened in your family of origin growing up? What did you watch? What did you make it mean? What did you believe? And are we continuing that on in our parenting? And some imprints are brilliant, right? Some imprints are amazing and they serve us and they're great. And there's a whole lot of others that don't. And it's our job to look at those imprints that don't, to see what we're carrying on, you know, passing on to our own children, or the way we respond to stuff, to do the work to change it. Because a lot of the time the imprints we have do not serve us. They keep us small. They keep the story alive that we're not enough. You know, a lot of the stories we have around imprints, it's not safe to feel, it's not okay to cry, it's not okay to be angry, all that kind of stuff. And this to me is the work of parenting, is basically looking backwards and going, whoa, what was I taught? Now, it's really important to remember that our parents were doing the best job they knew how. They are not wrong. They were doing what was done to them. Our job, and what is empowering, is to look back at the story and go, hey, that is a good bit. That's not a good bit. What do I want to change? And what do I want it to look like moving forward for my own children? And this is where there is some powerful, powerful work of parenting, as we get to change what the story is. But we can only really change the story if we look back and explore it. So a really, really simple thing that parents can do, if you're wondering, well, God, how do I know what my imprints are or what my reactions is to just often look at where you get triggered, right? So whatever it is that your child does that annoys you, or where you feel frustrated or whatever, the first question to ask yourself is, what is this feeling? What's going on here? So let's just imagine, for example, you have a 6-year-old, and your 6-year-old sitting there in the lounge room, and they just say, get me a drink, right? And you're like, right? And they're like, get me a drink. And all of a sudden you feel yourself just like, you know, bubbling up here, right? Now, you could choose in that moment to go, how dare you speak to me that way, right? And come in hard. And all of a sudden we've kind of missed an opportunity because we've just moved into power over. Or you could take a moment and go, why has that just annoyed the hell out of me, right? So what is this feeling I'm feeling? So what you might be feeling in that moment is, how dare you speak to me that way? I feel really disrespected, right? There's something here for me. So then I would ask you, the next question is, well, what does that remind you of? Where's that feeling from? Where do you know that from? Where have you felt disrespected before? Where does that turn up? Now that might be, you know what? My older brother used to talk to me that way all the time. Or my dad used to demand stuff of me all the time. And I used to hate that. So all of a sudden we've got some threads back into the past of where those feelings have come from. And often our job in those moments is to look back into the past and just go, okay, so what time, what did I feel? Where did I not get my needs met? So it may have been that if it was your brother who used to speak disrespectfully to you all the time, that you kind of, you know, lean back a bit and think, wow, the 5-year-old in me hated being told what to do by him. He just ordered me around and controlled me. And if we would say to that 5-year-old, well, what if it would have been safe to say what you really needed to say, what would you have said? And that 5-year-old in you might have said, don't tell me what to do. And it's not you are not the boss of me. And it's not okay for you to speak to me that way. And maybe that's what the inner 5-year-old you, that part of you really, really needed to express at that time. And as we kind of spend a little bit of time with our inner child, listening to that and seeing that, we start to heal part of the triggers or the traumas that still sit there around that certain thing. And then often what happens is then we are not having to be so reactive to our children. So as we do that little piece there and we heal some of that, next time our son says, "Get me a drink," we can be like, oh, that's a big, captain voice. "Yes, captain, what else would you like?" And we can lean in with some playfulness and some joking and some connection, and we can come in playfully and see that, him doing that, there is some learning that we need to teach him, or we can see that, he's actually just asking for some connection. And so we can come in playfully instead of needing to yell or power over. Or the next time he says it, we can come up to him, we can sit next to him and go, "Darling, it feels a bit hard on my ears when you order me around. Is there another way you could ask me that would feel beautiful for my soul? How's a different way we could do this?" And we just teach them without making them wrong or shaming them, but just say, "Hey, there's a different way we can speak to each other." Now, you can apply that to anything. It's whether your children whine and whinge all the time and that pushes your buttons, or it's if your kids, just pick your thing, right? Because we all have things that we get triggered about. But often a lot of the threads that are connected to the why we react have got to do with our own stories and our own past. And so particularly the big things that really fire us up or that we get really reactive around are often we have threads in the past that are asking those younger parts of us to be healed so that we can bring it to the future and be that calm anchor for our children, to guide them and to teach them without shaming them and without making them wrong. So how do we hold space for our kids? I think the first really, really important thing is to remember that it is our job as the adult to bring the calm and the centeredness and the anchored. It's never a child's job to make us feel okay. It is always our job to bring the presence and the calm for the children. We're the ones that are teaching them. So how do we get anchored? For me, it was about taking deep breaths. It's imagining that my feet were really planted on the ground, remembering I am the adult here that is here to guide and teach the child. So firstly, I need to get anchored. I always invite parents to see behind the behavior, which means that when our child's acting out or they're hitting their sibling or they're complaining about something or something's going on, they're actually waving a red flag going, "Hey, there's something happening for me and I need your help." No child ever feels good hitting another. No child ever feels good being mean to someone else. They're doing it because often they can't help it or there's pain within them. So we want to always make sure that we look behind the behavior. What are they telling me in this moment? I remind parents that a great thing to do is when your child walks into the room is to kind of scan them, is to do this kind of like, how are they, right? Now, if you're looking at them and they're relaxed and they're chatty and they're making eye contact, but like they're feeling pretty good. But if they walk into the room and their body's a bit tight and tense and they're grumbly a bit or they're complaining or they're wanting to pick a fight, you can be like, oh, there's something off here. And it's my job to help them try and find their way back into balance. So to go over and offer them some connection. Can I be a little bit playful to see if, that might meet their need for a little bit of connection? Or do I need to set a limit somewhere gently so they've got something to push up against to move some of the feelings that are getting in the way of what's going on? So, I'm always about, let's be curious, be super curious about where your kids are. Super curious, tuning in, how do I help them move whatever's present? So the other step too is to recognize when you get triggered, right? So when your stuff is coming up, and it can be so tricky in the moment, I know how hard it is that sometimes we can go from calm to yelling or to just losing it. And it's in those moments where we have to be able to take a moment and go, there's stuff here for me. One of the kindest things we can do is give ourselves a timeout, which might be going into the bathroom and washing your hands and taking a deep breath and reminding yourself, this is not an emergency and I am an adult here and there's something big for me and I'm going to work with that in a minute. But in this moment, I need to bring the presence to my child. So what do we need to do? Do you need to go outside? Do you need to take a deep breath? What do you need to do? And I know it's really hard, but it takes practice to be able to learn how to bring our own kind of regulation in. One of the biggest, most powerful things you can do as an adult and as a parent is have what we call a listening partner, which is another adult to talk to. And the job of a listening partner is not to fix you and it's not to offer you advice, but it is to be that calm listening space for you, which is what we are trying to bring to our children. But here's the trick, right? It's very hard to bring empathetic listening to children if we don't feel like we're being heard. So part of, I guess, parenting consciously, if we are going to listen to big feelings and emotions, is we need to make sure our big feelings and emotions are also being heard. Otherwise, we just don't have the capacity. And so a listening partner could be another parent, it could be a cousin, it can sometimes be an intimate partner, but sometimes it's good to not have it be them. You know, we sometimes need to talk about our partners. And that could be a therapist, it can be a counselor, but, you know, it can just be another parent friend. And, you know, what you do is you ring them, you text them and say, hey, you got to take 20 minutes to listen to me. And they're like, yep. And you ring up and you go, God, I just need to vent about this. And you can swear or you can complain and you can cry. And your listening partner's job is just to sit there and go, gosh, that sounds hard. And tell me more. And you're doing a good job. And I'm here with you, and to listen and bring you that love and empathy and compassion. Because again, you then learn, it feels really nice to be heard. And then you can swap and go, okay, your turn, tell me now, right? And then you listen to them. So self-care, as we know, is always vital. It's very hard to parent consciously if we're not taking care of our needs. We have to take care of our needs in order to be able to turn up with our kids. And more than anything, we have to learn to have compassion with ourselves, because we are all doing the best job we know how. You know, parenting is one of the hardest things that we do. It is like, it just hits all these sweet spots within us. And most of us were not raised in the way that we want to raise our kids. And so we have to have compassion for our learning and our journey. You know, if we are really critical with ourselves, and that inner critical, harsh voice often then gets passed on to our children. So it starts always with compassion, forgiveness and compassion for our stories and where we are. And then my last piece is absolutely connecting with other parents, because as I talked about learning a new language, we have to be around other parents who speak Italian. We have to be around other parents who speak the same language, because the more we hear it, the more we do it, the more it becomes second nature to us to, you know, to speak in that way. So there, for me, I guess some of the basics that we can work with of learning how to navigate those big feelings and emotions within ourselves, so that we can then turn up for our kids. And this is, you know, this is my, I guess, little quote that I love to say to finish off, is that, you know, our ultimate goal for our children is to feel deeply connected to us, so they know it's safe to be who they truly are. When they're safe to be themselves, and they can listen to their intuition, they align with their passions, and they can take risks and know that any failures are applauded as loudly as the triumphs. The default becomes who I am is enough. And that, to me, you know, in the 20 years that I've worked with adults, every wound that we often have comes back to this. Am I enough? Am I okay just the way I am? Do you love me for who I really am? That is the wound we all have. It just gets dressed up in different ways. So when we think about, most of us as adults are working through that, how do we do the opposite so our children do not have to grow up with that deficit, but they grow up going, I am enough just the way I am.
Absolutely stunning. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lael. I just feel like you've summed up so beautifully what I see is the struggle that we all have as parents. Can you give me an example, Lael? Because I really feel like the transformation of the parent and the growth of the parent is so fundamental to the growth of the child. And it's not a topic that we talk about in the parenting world, or in just, you know, to talk on this level is a whole other way of helping us to be with our children in such a profound, growth-oriented sort of journey together as a family. So I'm really curious to know about, could you give us maybe an example of a parent that you've worked with where you've taken them through a process of transformation, of first identifying what their own imprints were, and with that knowledge and that understanding and what parenting was like prior, and then once they did the work on themselves, how that then shifted through? Is anything coming to you?
Look, I have a gazillion examples of that, but I think probably the number one that I think most parents come to with this theme is Often parents come to me and go, there's something wrong with my child. And I go, okay, what's going on? And they're like, well, my 6-year-old just loses it all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so what are they doing? And they'll tell me, you know, that they lose it about this, or they want to control that, or all those kind of things. Or it could be that there's been a new baby and the 4-year-old or the 3-year-old is being really horrible and biting and pinching and all that kind of stuff. So usually parents come to me because there's something wrong with their child and they don't know how to deal with it. They've tried to punish them, they've tried to control it, all that kind of stuff that's not working. And so, and I go, okay, great. So tell me what your child's doing, so we can firstly see that the child is telling us something, you know, and if we look behind the behavior, what are they telling us? Well, usually the causes of behavior is they feel powerless. They've got a build-up of feelings and emotions they're not able to express, you know, or there's connection that's not being met for them. So the first part I often say to parents is, okay, so we've got your child here and we'll deal with them in a minute, but let me firstly ask you, how does that feel for you? So if we look at the example of this 6-year-old who's losing it all the time, and I might say to this parent, so what does that feel like for you? And, you know, what's the thought that I often love to say, when your child is losing it, tell me what your inner dialogue is. Like, don't censor yourself, just be really real here. What do you feel like? And usually they swear and go, why are you doing this? Why are you making my life hard? And don't you know how lucky you are? Or, you know, there's usually something that is around, you know, why? And don't you know how lucky you are to have this? And so I go, okay, great. So let's lean into that. So if your thought is, don't you know how lucky you are to have me? You know, I go, tell me a bit more about that. Where were you when you were 6? And so a parent might go, well, if I was 6 and I spoke to my parents that way, I would have got belted and I got put in my room. And then I'll say to them, gosh, that sounds really painful. How does that feel for you when you think about that? And then they might start to get teary, or they might feel the pain of that. And I will say, that must have felt very painful, that as a 6-year-old, you were probably just trying to express your needs, and yet you got shut down or hurt or punished or sent away. You know, what is it that you really wanted from your parent at that time? Like, if your parent could have responded to you in the way you wanted, what would you have needed? And they always say the same thing. I would have wanted my parent to get calm and look me in the eye and say, I can see you're having a hard time, and I'm here, and I love you, and keep going. And so usually when we reach that point, there's often tears for the adult, which is beautiful, because that is the healing and the release. And so then I say to them, let's imagine the wise parent in you was sitting with that little 6-year-old you. And what would the wise parent in you say to that 6-year-old? And the wise parent will often say something like, I'm so sorry you got hit, or I'm so sorry you were in your room on your own, you know, and left alone with those big feelings. And I'm really sorry that happened for you. And I really acknowledge how painful that is. And I'm here, and I love you just the way you are. And I'm going to take care of you now. And then I might invite the adult to just imagine that little 6-year-old, pull them in close and make a bit of a promise, that 6-year-old, I'm here with you. I'm going to take care of you. I'm sorry you didn't get what you need, but I'm going to take care of you now. And as we start to integrate perhaps those parts with us, then what happens is it gives us a bit more capacity then to see not only what our child is doing, but to meet our child in a different way. So then next time the child gets angry or says something or whatever, we have more capacity to see behind the behavior. We have more capacity to meet them with compassion instead of judgment.
I think that part there is the tricky part that I find with parents, is seeing behind the behavior. And it isn't until they connect in with their own unmet needs or their own internal struggles with their own emotional backpack that it's very hard then to be able to support their own child to do the same. So that's what seeing behind the behavior was the one thing I thought, that's the part people struggle with.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is that we can only often take another human to the capacity that we're willing to go ourselves.
Yeah.
So as adults, if we've been brought up where it's not safe to feel, which most adults have, and we've learned to repress our feelings, or we've turned it into aggression, then as we start to lean into those feelings that never got to be heard, as we start to talk about them, as we start to cry about them, as we start to give them some voice, it increases our capacity then to meet that with our child.
Yeah.
It is very hard to move into deep compassion with someone who is angry or is upset when we are still having an inner dialogue that's like, how dare you? Why are you making my life hard? Or, God, what's wrong with you? Or, you know, when we've got the harsh inner critical stuff there, it makes it very, very difficult to meet that with our children. And so the work is to keep looking at what parts of me still need to be met? What parts of me are still in pain? What parts are still hurt? How do I lean into them? And, you know, this is where transformation is extraordinary, because I've worked with families where, you know, as soon as a child gets upset, they send them to their room, they try and control them, punish them. The behavior just gets worse. And as the parent learns to be with their own anger and hurt, then it brings their capacity to be with anger and hurt with their child. And that's when the child then gets to express all the big hurt feelings. They come back into balance, their behavior changes, then we start to see harmony in the home. Parents stop yelling, they're able to meet their kids where they're at, because the more they can be with their own inner hurt and anger, the more they can be with it here. And one of the biggest things that I see with women particularly is something I call mother rage. And what mother rage is that, you know, you might be this calm, pacifist kind of woman, and then you become a mother, and so many women go, and I just lose it. Like I become nuts and crazy, and I don't know what's wrong with me because I'm not like that. Yeah. And then we unpack, okay, so what goes on there? And they're like, well, they won't do what I want them to do, or they won't put their shoes on, or they won't get in the car, or they won't go to sleep, or there's usually an element of powerlessness there. And so then, you know, again, we go back in time a little bit. Okay, so tell me, as a little girl, you know, did you ever get to be angry, or did you ever get to be upset? And most of them were like, no, I had to be good all the time. And I go, so let's imagine that there's years and years of suppressed anger in there where you didn't get to yell, no, I don't like it, or don't make me wear those shoes, or that's not fair, or whatever it is, because we were expected to be good little girls. And I go, that anger's still there. It's just never had a chance to be expressed. And then you become a parent and you feel ultimately so powerless that all of a sudden those feelings come pouring up and out. And unfortunately, they're projected onto the little people that we shouldn't project them onto. But on some level, they are our safest target, because they're dependent on us and they love us regardless, right? And so then we bring it there, or we bring it to our partner. But mothering particularly, you know, I find is just, it's so ripe. This was me too, to access so much of the unspoken rage and hurt that we've never actually got to express. All those little good girls, the message we're taught, be good, be quiet, don't rock the boat, right? And we have not been taught how to use our power.
Little girls are not allowed to be angry, and little boys are not allowed to be sad. That's it. Very general, but it's very cultural.
Yep. And so that's why, again, it's hard for men to cry. It's hard for them to feel their feelings. Very challenging for a lot of that fathers I work with to be with little ones when they cry. They just want to fix it or stop it. You know, we need to make it stop. And because it often is, again, tapping into their own uncomfortableness that they were never allowed to cry. So, you know, I look at it and go, there's a lot of repair work to do. But here's the thing. I know this work is so powerful because probably like you know, you've got adult kids and I have adult children now, and I have raised them with this way, and their emotional awareness and intelligence and connection to their sense of self is just extraordinary. And my two adult children, my son and my daughter, they both work with children now. They're disability support workers, so they work with kids with autism. My son actually works at my school. And their ability to be present with children and their feelings is so innate. Like you don't even, like I do training for the adults at my school to teach them. I don't need to teach my children. They just know it. They're like, that is the only way to respond with compassion and empathy and
that is a superpower. That is a superpower. That is one of the greatest gifts you could give your children, is the ability to attune, to read situations, to read people, to know how to deal with difficult experiences, difficult people.
Yes.
That is a real superpower.
It is. And that's why I just go, doing the work on yourself is the biggest gift you can give your children. It doesn't matter what school you send them to, if you feed them organic food, you know, where you live. If you don't do your own work and you are going to pass on your stories. And our kids don't want to carry our stories. That's why they push back. And they are not meant to carry our stories forward. And it is us now that you know, somewhere, even if you're watching this, somewhere you've put your hand up to go, right, I'm ready to do the work, to change the story, because it is the biggest gift you can give your kids, so they can be free to be who they need to be.
So can you tell me what options people have when it comes to doing the work?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, look, I'm a big fan of do anything that helps you explore deeper, right? So, you know, in my field, what I do is I have programs that people can do. You can do like live rounds with me. I have like a couples course you can do online that is about looking at these imprints and stories and patterns and stuff. So you can do it as a couple. You can, you know, work one-on-one with therapists. Like, you know, the way I'm all a big fan of whatever's your modality, whatever feels good for you, whoever you feel safe with, work with them. But as long as you keep looking at what are my reactions, what am I feeling, you know, and how am I responding to my kids? And look, you know, the key to knowing where your crap is just how you react, right? If you are calm and connected and you're feeling good, then you're probably feeling pretty good, and you've probably done some self-process stuff. Wherever you get angry, wherever you feel mad, wherever you feel jealous, wherever you feel, you know, wherever those edges are turning up, well, that's where you got to go. Most people, when they're first doing this work, do need someone else to hold a space for them to do it. As we begin to develop the tools, like my goal whenever I work with adults is to give them a whole lot of tools and go, and now you've got them, you don't need me, you go do it. You can, whatever pops up, you know. And as your kids grow, different levels are going to turn up. You know, you might have little kids now and you're working through these fundamental things around trust and anger and boundaries, you know, and then your kids will become teenagers, and then you get to work through all the stuff around sexuality and friendships and puberty and, you know, all the gorgeous stuff. The age of your kids is when your shit's going to come up, so you've got to keep working with it. So, you know, I think
good point.
Pardon?
That's a good point. There's no destination. It's an ongoing unraveling of potential and activation of the blueprint.
Yes.
Potential that we all have inside of us. Thank you so much for your time today, Lael. You are a wealth of wisdom and deep, profound change, which is what I wish for all of my families on both in our community and also beyond our community, to really start to awaken to what we all have inside of us and how we can grow with our children. So thank you again for your time.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And, you know, I really honor the work you're doing with families, because I just think no matter what, you know, when we can create safety for families and we have these beautiful guides and mentors to show them a different way, then we're going to change where the planet is, and that's what we need. So Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for all your beautiful work too.
Thanks, Lael.
Awesome.